Welcome back to the final episode of Dropping Gems. I'm excited for this one. This is going to be, I guess, kind of the best way to send this one off. We got Melissa Vincent in the building and Dalton Higgins. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I want to give a little bio on these two for anyone who's unaware. Both extremely multi-talented people in their fields. Melissa Vincent is a writer, an editor, and content strategist based in the greatest city in the world, Toronto, Canada. She does a little radio, a little TV, sometimes a podcast, sometimes festival curation, a little moderating here and there. Her work has appeared in Pitchfork, Billboard, the Globe and Mail, Fader, Vice, Spacing, and the West End Phoenix. And she also was, part of the jury for the Polaris Prize and many of your favorite Canadian awards. Talk about Dalton Higgins a little bit now. I want to let everyone know the bio that I'm about to read for you is maybe 1/3 of his credentials. He's a PR strategist, publicist, author of 6 books, festival producer, national magazine award-winning journalist, and TV, radio, and podcast personality. A leading Toronto-based publicist whose active roster includes clients who have won a wider range of awards, BET Awards, and Mercury Prize, been nominated for Grammys, Junos, Emmys, and his best-selling book, Far From Over: The Music and Life of Drake, carried in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum collection in Cleveland. I think that has to be the best accomplishment I've ever seen anyone have. That is incredible, and it sheds light on the cultural conditions in Toronto and the United States that helped create the Drake phenomenon. He currently hosts the Black Tea podcast with Melania Williams. Again, thank you guys for joining us.
All right, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I do want to take this all the way back, decades in the past now, to high school. When you were in high school, what were you thinking about your future, and then how did what you did in your secondary education change that? Melissa, you can go first. Talk about what did you think of for yourself when you were in high school, and then did that change as you went to university, college?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was talking to a friend about this yesterday. Like growing up, being in high school, it's this like strange bubble where you have a lot of time, and if you're interested in something unusual and niche, you have an endless amount of time to investigate that. So I feel that when I remember being in high school, I remember just obsessing over music in this really meticulous and kind of dorky way that I also am aware of a lot of conversations kids in high school have with guidance counselors or teachers. They don't train you to believe that a career in arts and culture is something that's viable. So I think in high school, I always assumed that music and writing and anything that was close to any kind of artistic or creative space would be a hobby or it'd be a kind of second thing, and became fairly comfortable with that. And I went to U of T a couple of years ago, and actually had planned to major in linguistics and go into speech and language pathology because I liked words, but then I didn't know if I could do the writing journalism thing, and it felt like a nice way to still play with language and play with text and be mindful of how the intersection of those things with politics and history and like society could kind of align. And I mean, I think what's so interesting about doing this with Ryerson is that the only reason that I kind of got into media was because U of T had a really strong campus publication culture that I found a home in really quickly, that became a really important foundation for me to learn a lot of things and learn a lot of things with a bunch of hungry, curious, interesting people, and then ended up here. Sometimes it always feels like by accident.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Mel, you raised some really interesting points. I mean, I think if I think back to my high school years, which is, that's like way back in the Stone Ages, I would say that I went to a school called Oakwood Collegiate, and so it's in the city in Toronto. And coming out of that school, so the school is like a miniature United Nations, meaning which actually forms the basis for my work, my point of view, my frame of reference in that. So it's like the most diverse school like on the planet. So what that meant is we used to do these little sort of research studies, like compile data on the demographic, of the student body, and you would see like 10% is Black, 10% is Italian, 10% is South Asian, 10% is Asian, 5% is Indigenous, 10% is Eastern European. It's just like that's so it's like the United Nations, right? So so when it came time to, now here's the thing, as far as what courses you were strong in and not strong in, I mean, English literature was always my strongest course, anything having to do with English, going straight through from grade, when I transferred to Oakwood, grade 11 to 13. So there was maybe something there, an inkling of opportunity. You're kind of going like, okay, this geography, like I totally suck and I'm getting like 71 or 69. That's probably not, I don't want to be an urban planner, So sometimes the courses you take in high school that you just happen to be doing quite well in, whether it be phys ed, history, it sort of helps you to carve a path, helps you to think, about what do I want to do in college or university, whatever your situation is, if you continue on with school. And then I went to York University, did undergrad there, and I studied English literature and mass communications. All right, so a lot of reading and writing, cranking out like just bushels, essays ad nauseum around the clock. And then the other half of my 4-year degree, it's doing courses tied to film and television and video and radio. Now, when we talk about the importance of school, I actually started volunteering, like Mel was saying this interesting thing about student media and what have you. And it was just like, so at York, that my first interaction with radio was community radio. It was CHRY 105.5 up at York. And my first kind of written words, like serious written words, was being published in the student newspaper called the Excalibur at York University. So these are the first times I'm really being published in a newspaper. It's campus community media.
No, I thought you guys made 2 great points there, and talking about having that kind of established newspapers at your schools, giving you those opportunities, that's huge. And then again, seeing that you can do it. Melissa, you talked about, you thought that it was more going to be a hobby than a job. I saw this kind of personally in my life when I did a co-op internship in grade 11 at Rogers TV. The next semester, most of the kids in that co-op were from my school, and that went on for about 3 or 4 years. When you guys were growing up, was there someone that you saw kind of doing what you're doing now to some degree that you thought, if I can kind of follow this path, maybe I can get there? Dalton, you can go ahead first.
Totally. That's a great question. I like to pay homage and tribute to those that came before me. I would say that a lot of the tricks of the trade, that I learned, that I use to this day, 20 years in the business, 25 years, it came from hanging around elders, people that had been in the industry for years. So there's a guy, his name is Clifton Joseph, and Clifton Joseph he's an OG. He had worked out of TVO, TV Ontario, working on a bunch of shows there, and also had worked at CBC for many years. There's a show called Marketplace. He's worked on a plethora of shows, and he also did community radio. And it's interesting, and he's a neighbor of mine. He actually just happens to be a neighbor of mine now. And now growing up and sort of looking at the television screen, and you're looking for somebody that perhaps looks like you, like they say, if you see it, you can be it, So it's kind of like he was one of the few, Black men that I saw like on television, reporting hard news, reporting on popular culture, and doing it in sort of as far as mainstream television. So he's a guy that is definitely somebody I looked up to. I said, I want to do what that guy does. And he was very much into counterculture, around asking tough questions, doing like issues-oriented reporting. So things tied to racism, sexism, misogyny, classism, ableism. Like he was one of those types of people, super progressive, super forward thinking. And I said, I want to do what this guy's doing. So I don't think I've ever even told him that to his face, but it's just like, yeah, he had a great impact on my, my young forming brain in my early 20s, trying to get into the game, for sure.
Yeah, it's so funny that you can live so close to somebody, and it's like you have all of this information and context for them in your head, but you've never actually said that to them. Do you think that you're going to tell him that soon?
I think so. Maybe after we wrap up this interview, I'm going to call him and be like, hey, Clifton, by the way.
Be like, whatever you do, tune into this interview, and then you can hear me give you roses.
Yes, fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I think growing up, it was a mix of two things. I mean, I don't think I'll ever forget watching Tracy Moore on just TV with my mom, and like feeling so close to her and feeling that she was somebody who was really familiar to like my family, and we kind of talked about her as she was in the room. And I think just that kind of representation on screen early on does a lot to just teach you how you can fit into spaces, especially if you're interacting with media. And Dalton, you mentioned kind of counterculture media oftentimes isn't super representative. So to just see somebody that looks like you on screen, I think does a lot to help you figure out how you fit into things. But I think later on in high school, like around grade 9, grade 10, I just got really into indie rock and I got really into experimental music and felt quite isolated in high school when it came to my friend group and trying to teach the people close to me why the music that I liked mattered, and feeling like I was sort of consistently pushing against a wall. So I think another kind of formative early role model type figure was when Damian Abraham was hosting The Wedge. And I think seeing him kind of bring artists that I was falling in love with down to a very human level and really push to get at something that was more personal and more intimate, especially in spaces when it can be really about the music and really about the art. And I think that's just as important. But I mean, I also think you can ask people humanizing questions. And watching that kind of through line that he established on The Wedge, that I think like a lot of the prior hosts established as well. And it felt like, in a lot of ways, I've taken a lot of that into my own approach to writing and profiling and interviewing.
So I think that it's only fair that you got to tell Damien and Tracy about your love for them, because Dalton has to talk about his love for Clifton. I feel like that's only fair. That's kind of what this show has become. When I had Akil and Cabby on, Akil was just telling Cabby the whole time about how he was his mentor. So I feel like that's a huge part of this show. This is probably my favorite question that I ask people, and I think this is one of the most important. Is once you kind of figured out the direction you wanted to go in, what were the things that you focused on? You know, were you saying, I want to write these type of stories? Do I want to do this type of work? Melissa, you can go first. What was the stuff that you focused on that you thought this will kind of take me further than where I am now?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always tried to really keep myself open to everything. I mean, I love learning new things, and I especially love being challenged with things that I might not have done before, writing about things that I'm not familiar with, and really taking every opportunity as an important stepping stone to build new skills and to learn from people and to listen to people. I mean, I think when it comes to arts and culture, it's everybody kind of has to be um, well equipped to wear many hats. I mean, I definitely didn't start writing assuming that like content strategy and curation and like some festival programming would all become a part of this job. But when you kind of zoom out of what your immediate role is, you see that you have a lot of applicable skills. And sometimes it's like a little bit of a learning curve to actually be quite good at some things you might not have initially considered. So I think just being open to things and kind of listening to things. My very good friend, and sometimes I think of her as a sort of mentor, Anupa Mystery. I, always appreciate her saying that she takes every meeting, and sometimes she just goes to meetings to listen. And the act of, I think, just sitting in a room and letting somebody give you information about how they might see you in a role and how they might position you in a role before you can see those things can be a really valuable tool to give you additional insight. That, in addition to just like giving yourself time to become good at your craft. And I think being very mindful of how you're scaling your work. I mean, we live in a like digital climate where you see people who are the best at what they do, like kind of on this horizontal playing field on Instagram and Twitter. And I think it can be really difficult for a lot of young writers or young people who are starting in arts and culture to get frustrated and lose confidence if they're not immediately on that level. So, I mean, I think if you're starting out, it's okay to be proud of the fact that you're learning and that you're not perfect and that you might like have room to grow. That's a really important thing to identify, because that learning never really ends. It's a lifelong process, I feel.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, what's interesting as I listen to Melissa, I realize, yeah, there's just all of these interesting and not unusual just intersections, you know, that we all have. Like, so she's referencing all of these things. Like she's like, you know, Damien Abraham, you know, and he's in one of my books. It's a book called Fatherhood 4.0. And it's just about how a new generation of dads that sort of grew up like not, you know, like, you know, sort of technology and sort of newer school, like how we're navigating our fatherhood. Because I do feel he's an, you know, pretty influential sort of broadcaster, podcaster kind of person. And then you mentioned things like when I first, I'm going to tie this back into, you know, my love for journalism is my first paid gig. So, you know, when you're like a musician, if you're doing something and you actually get paid to do it, like you're going to do music anyways. And then if somebody says, hey, here's $200, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you're just like, okay, cool, I'm doing this. Like, I got this, you know? So with writing, that's what it was for me. So you know, I'm at York studying, you know, English lit and just cranking out a bunch of stuff, you know, like I guess pre-blog era. And then I was covering an event for York University's newspaper called the Excalibur. And I end up at this event. It was the launch of a magazine about Rastafarian culture. And there I see another journalist, this guy, Ali Sharif, Somali brother. And he, you know, we just get to talking. And then he goes, hey, man, have you ever heard of like Now Magazine? Yeah, man, they might be into some of your ideas. You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, cool. I kind of know Now Magazine. It's everywhere. You know, it's a free weekly newspaper. And anyways, just fast forwarding this story, I kind of then, he introduces me to the editor, this guy Zuhair Kashmiri, the South Asian editor. He's like an OG. He'd worked at the Globe and Mail. He was an editor now. And next thing you know, he assigns me a story, you know, like weeks later. We had a meeting for coffee. So anyways, then my first paycheck, you know, I got it. I wrote for Now Magazine in the 90s. It was $75. And for writing an opinion piece, like an op-ed, you know, and I was just like, when I saw that first check, I was like, man, I can get paid to do this just to kind of express my opinions about youth culture and about like, I'm all about this life, you know. Tying that back to Mel now, you know how I know Mel? I don't even know if I told her this, but she was, when it comes to music, yeah, so my father is like kind of like a music collector, and I grew up in a neighborhood in you know, Eglinton Avenue West, that is affectionately referred to as a Little Caribbean or Little Jamaica. So music is around me just 24/7 growing up, and but a broad spectrum of music, you know. So we're talking at Oakwood, there were a lot of there just happened to be a lot of Black kids that were into what they call alternative music. And so I remember reading it in Now Magazine, where I started writing. That's my first job as a reporter, is working in the news department. Now, I read a story about Mel years ago about these indie promoters that are doing like this sort of alternative like music show, like alternative musics, and they happen to be like Black, you know what I mean? And I was like, who are these people? You know what I mean? Yeah, that's why for like, and
Wow.
that's how I remember Mel, you know what I mean? Because I said, shit, that's cool, because me being like older school, I had produced this event called Bad Brains, which was kind of like, I called it an Afro-alternative like music summit. And it was just a bunch of people that happened to be Black or racialized that were not into just, you know, like hip hop, R&B, you know, the historically Black music, but were into other things, you know what I mean? Like into rock, and it could be country, it could be whatever, you know? So yeah, so that's how I met Mel. And I was just like, Mel is cool, you know what I mean? Like she's just like, yeah. I read about Mel in Now Magazine, the newspaper that I worked for years. Yeah.
Wow, that made my whole day. I had no idea, because on that note, I was thinking about when I first met you, Dalton, and it was when and I mean, you also don't know this, I'm telling you this for the first time, but when I was in high school, I remember every year you look forward to North by Northeast, because it's the only festival that's all ages. So when you can't get into all of the 19 plus shows you want to, you go to North by Northeast. And you did a panel at Sonic Boom.
Right. Yeah.
Do you remember? And it was like, I think I took the train by myself, and I remember sitting kind of in the back of the panel, and I sat and I took notes, and I was going through my Facebook, and there's a photograph there of you, but you obviously felt very distant at that time. but remember just like furiously kind of wanting to capture everything that everyone was saying on that panel, because it felt like people were saying these things that I thought I was the only one who was thinking them, and you helped validate that. So I guess
it's
yeah,
awesome.
in a
So Mel,
way that's kind of reciprocal.
no, it's amazing, yeah, because we're all just extensions of oneself. Not to get all Adriel, not to get all hippy dippy, but Melissa is like an extension of like some, you know what I mean? Of like, she works out of the same, we were the same tradition. She's just considerably younger, but it's just awesome, you know? Yeah.
I love to see those connections, like those connections that we have as kind of people in the media in Toronto. Those are like my favorite thing. Kind of those stories of when you first meet someone or first see someone for the first time, and then meet them there down the road and build that relationship. You know, those are things that you will honestly never forget. So those
Mhm.
those things are really beautiful. I want to talk about the freelance culture. You know, obviously a lot of people graduating recently, graduating this year, like myself. You know, freelancing is become a way of life. A lot less, you know, full-time work, a lot less benefits, and more contract work. When it comes to freelancing, Melissa, you said earlier how you weren't afraid to take meetings or, you know, talk to a bunch of people, take opportunities. When it comes to freelancing, what advice do you have for someone who's trying to, you know, make their name in this business but doesn't want to do a ton of free work?
Hmm. This is a $1 million question, because yeah, I mean, I feel like I've always kind of navigated the freelance world in different stages. Before, like about a year ago, I worked at Blue Ant Media on a brand there for about 2 years, which was a very kind of like corporate salaried kind of job situation. And then in the last year, it's been a mix of like part-time salaried things, long-term freelance contracts, also taking on freelance contracts on the side. And I think that for new, I don't know, Dalton, please feel free to stop me, because I hope I'm not just sort of spewing things. But I
Yeah.
think for new writers, and I think for people kind of coming out of journalism school, there's a lot you still kind of need to learn. And I think that it's possible that some of those early learning experiences set you up for success later on. Kind of what I was talking about before, like understanding, you know, just being really empathetic about your own limitations, but then also valuing your work at the same time. And I really appreciated a trend I've seen in the last couple of years where writers and kind of media people at different levels of their career are just really transparent about rates and transparent about how they're pricing things out. And I feel like having open conversations about that can just help younger folks coming in to have a benchmark. So if they get pitched a rate that feels unreasonable, it isn't like, even if something feels unreasonable in their gut, they also have evidence and they also have context. I think it's super important to build a community around yourself and to build a network and a support system around yourself. So when you get things and you're trying to wrestle, if it feels like a good idea, because sometimes you get asked to do projects and, you know, maybe it's a high profile project, maybe it's a project that you think you're going to benefit from it in different ways and a good marketing opportunity or whatever. You kind of are always making those adjustments and you're making those negotiations. Some projects are like, you know, you need to buy your groceries and you need to get paid a certain amount to do that. Other projects, they kind of come from the heart and you can you can really kind of make some adjustments with your typical rate. But having a network around you where you can ask those questions, where you can have somebody give you a gut check, I think is super, super important.
Yeah, totally. Just I'll just sort of add on to that point because it's a big one. It's a super hugely important point around, or you know, that they say that your network is your net worth. You ever heard that quote? They say your network is your net worth. That is a super truism. And what I mean, what I can say sort of like as a seasoned vet is, and I don't want to sound like the prophet of doom here or anything, but this whole idea around meritocracy, you know, meritocracy is a myth. Okay. What I've seen in the industry over the last couple of decades, it's a ton of, you know, we call it like, you know, nepotism, cronyism, this type of thing, it tends to dominate the media industry, as it does other industries. You know, I don't think the media exists on a separate island when it comes to nepotism. But I think the whole networking thing is something I couldn't begin to stress. I've seen opportunities to, you know, host national television shows. Like, I'm not going to name names, but work local radio, public radio, things come about because people just happen to be in the room at the table, you know, at the table. All right. So what I would strongly encourage, you know, up and coming, you know, young burgeoning talents, you know, whether you're doing like print, you know, newspapers, magazines, radio, television, doesn't matter, podcasts, is if you have an opportunity to reach out, like get some, you know, mentorship or something like that, or just somebody who's kind of been there, done that. So you're not like trying to reinvent the wheel, and just sort of strengthen and broaden your network, your immediate support. Like kind of like what Melissa said, I'm pretty sure in Melissa's life, different kind of things and opportunities come about, you know, from you assigning a writer a story because you just kind of know them and they're in your sphere of influence and you kind of like them. So you're like, hey, write a story for me. And likewise, you know, like if I had something, even Melissa, just knowing Melissa and knowing she's very solid and very well respected in the industry, if something's coming in around my, you know, sphere of influence, I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm totally, Melissa's on. In fact, that even happened. You were going to name names. I remember we were talking about a certain national public, you know what I mean? I remember we were in a call, I said, no, yeah, like totally, you know, cosign, like, yeah, because I believe in Melissa, right? So these things happen all the time, you know? So that this idea of, you know, your network is your net worth is it, you know, sounds like some kind of sloganeering, but it's super true in the media industry.
Yeah. And I also think too, like, you know, there are a lot of ways you can kind of build those relationships. I mean, you know, we're in the middle of a global pandemic and everybody's inside their house and everybody's in front of their computer. So, I mean, we're obviously lacking a lot of those physical spaces where you can go up to where you can go up to somebody at a show, or you can go up to somebody at like a panel and pull them aside afterwards and talk. But I mean, I do think that a lot of folks are still willing and are frankly quite excited to receive an email or to receive a kind of note if you want to meet for coffee. I mean, what gets kind of tricky with that is you get into this like, let me kind of like pick your brain type of thing. And I think as a young writer and as a young media person, those things are really important to do. But you know, something I would caution is just being very mindful of time and being mindful of somebody's resources to, you know, sit and provide information and provide knowledge, because everybody's kind of working, and those barriers are a little bit more horizontal. So it's one of those things where when you do sort of make those decisions about reaching out to people, you want to do it with a lot of humility, and you want to do it with a lot of openness, and you want to do it in a way that doesn't seem like you're taking somebody's time for granted, or that you feel like you're entitled to their time, that you're being really respectful of trying to build, hopefully, a long lasting and meaningful relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, most things come back down to, you know, just good people, nice people. And sometimes, you know, I guess young journalists would be surprised, pleasantly surprised at the type of response you get back from seasoned vets. You know, like sometimes we're wanting to get hit up, you know, we want to give back free information, like pro bono, you know what I mean? Like it's about the give back. It's like, or I guess in the Black community, we have this sort of each one teach one, a very collectivist approach to things. It's not really kind of like, okay, I'm going to go make $1 billion and everybody else suffer and start. Like, no, it's people, you know, not to overgeneralize or paint a community with a broad stroke, because again, we're not a homogenous community, but this collectivist kind of thing. So you'll find sometimes you might be pleasantly surprised, some Black journalists or racialized journalists will be like, hey, I'm actually honored that you're reaching out to me and that you read my work or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and then we're always willing to put people under it. But money, but as far as money now, making it as a freelance, yeah, you want to be thinking like just diversified revenue streams, you know, like I've always, when I was writing, you know, it's kind of like, let's say, you know, Mel or Adriel, you're like a writer and I'm just like, okay, but you have, you know, you're very well-spoken, super articulate. You know, you can start looking at ways to generate, you know, like podcasts, broadcasts, like there are all these different, like try to become more like a multimedia journalist. Okay. Which is what I call myself. Because some people that are stuck to writing, they're writing for blogs and newspapers and whatever. But then like when you hear them speak, you're like, holy cow, you're super articulate on on, I don't know, shoegaze, or you know what I mean? Like you're whatever, you're super
Mhm.
articulate on this phrase, this type of music genre or multidisciplinary arts. So you can quite easily segue, yourself into opportunities as far as broadcasts with a public
Mhm.
podcaster with Sirius XM, podcasts, Canada, like whatever. So yeah, just always be thinking kind of like, yeah, is this kind of like a pie, like a diversified revenue streams. Try to find out where the money is. I don't believe in young journalists not really doing work for free. Like I've never been like I don't believe in that. And when I can pay, yeah, that's not something I fundamentally agree with it or believe in. I think if you can pay somebody $50, $70, like something, there's no reason a young journalist who's fresh out of J school, like once you've done your internship and mentorship, should not be making money. Okay, that's my position, and it's a position I tell people my age range. No, pay them, even if it's $50. That's $50 more than they had yesterday. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we love to hear that. But you guys dropped a whole bunch of gems right there. That's kind of why we do this. You guys dropped so much game, so much kind of helpful information. One thing you guys kind of sparked for me was the importance of relationships and that networking. When I did my first live show, the two paid positions that I had, I didn't even kind of think of anyone else other than people that I knew and already worked with. And I hadn't thought of that until you guys mentioned that right there. And that's kind of the definition of your network breeding those things. So again, very, very important. I'm happy you guys said that right there. And Melissa, you mentioned the quarantine, this coronavirus, the global pandemic. It's happening all around us. I want to get from you guys where you were when, kind of that first, I guess, news hit that it really was going to be a quarantine, and then what that meant for your business or businesses that were happening at the time. For me, of course, I talked about the live show earlier. We did our first live show, I think, a month before everything shut down, and we were set to do 3 more in the summertime. So that was immediately closed. What was it for you guys that it wasn't happening? And Dalton, you can go first.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for one, this idea of working, being mobile, working out of one's home. So I've been doing that since Jesus. So when I was freelancing, I've always, I've been working out of when I was with my, wife. But we've had, apartments. We have a place now. We've had a place for many years, but just working out of the home. So that's kind of like and maybe Melissa could relate this, kind of like a sort of a punk DIY indie sort of ethos. Like that's how I work, so even while working with large corporations, but I'm just thinking about like, yeah, DIY, like I can just try to generate my own revenue and do things that way. So there was no adjustment for me. I've always worked like that. I'm kind of used to, when I was freelance writing for magazines, or how about this, I had this great job in the early 2000s working for a .com company called Indie Planet, and it was about indie culture, but throughout the North America, the US, based out of New York. And that was a job where I can work, be mobile, so kind of like this thing, have laptop will work. I've been doing that since like the early 2000s, right? You know what I mean? Just give me like Wi-Fi, and a laptop, and I'm good. I'm straight. So crank out some content and just invoice, and hopefully invoices, come within 60, 90 days, which is just absolutely insane. We could do a whole show on that, on pay periods, but anyways, yeah, I think that's, just to get back to, the COVID, I think people that are equipped, that maybe have like a more DIY indie kind of, ethic as far as society, as far as work life balance, maybe the adjustment was a little easier, like where you're not like super over reliant on like, I'm not to say major corporations, but you're kind of like, hey, I can make a do. Like it's very hip hop. That's very hip hop. It's very hip hop. It's very punk. It's just like, okay, we have no money, but we're gonna like make this art form that travels the globe and with zero resources, and it's gonna blow up. So I have a very hip hop, very punk kind of, you see what I mean? So I would say that, but on the flip side, it is super scary. I mean, I'm not here to paint pretty pictures. Scary as hell. If you work, I have clients in the music industry, obviously, a lot of clients, and they're not touring, they're not making any money. So everybody's being impacted, right? So I'm not here to paint a pretty picture. I'm just saying that people are used to kind of DIY. They're kind of like, okay, hey man, I'm used to kind of just trying to make it anyways, with very little support. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because now that there's a bit of distance, I feel like we can look back on that week in March and maybe feel like it's not as sharp, but I mean, things happened so immediately. Like I had like a couple of trips booked in the like the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, that in the same day got canceled. And everybody that I spoke to had a very similar story where it just felt like things were being cut off. And I mean, I think Dalton is totally right about this is really like devastating and in a lot of ways traumatic time for a lot of people, because there's, you know, obviously concerns about your well-being, there's a loss of revenue, there's a loss of a lot of those social support networks that we tend to rely on quite heavily but then forget about until they're gone. So all of those things, I think those things are in the back of everybody's mind. That being said, I think now that we're a couple of months in and we've seen so many parts of the industry almost go through this hard reset, and people are forced to be creative and think about how they can deliver things that you love, whether it's music or events, in new and beautiful ways. I think that watching things like that happen, like watching Club Quarantine happen out of Toronto and receive international attention, and you know, that community sort of think through how can we give our friends what they need as quickly and as efficiently and as safely as possible, has been something I've been really excited to see in the middle of quarantine. And I mean, I think when it comes to my own work, Dalton, you're right. Like when you write and you do things that are based on you really only need a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, and you're kind of good to go whenever. That being said, I remember early on experiencing a lot of like exhaustion just because it was like all laptop and all computer and all technology and nothing to kind of break up the day. Because typically, you know, you wake up, you go to a couple of meetings in the morning, you maybe work at a coffee shop in the afternoon, and then there's like a show that night. And you kind of have this really nice structure and pacing to your day, when all of it is sort of involved in professional growth. All of those are professional activities, but they're done in a bunch of different ways. So you have your very like cerebral top of mind meeting in the morning, then you get some private time to work and catch up on things. And then in the evening, that's when you build relationships, and that's when you talk to people. And you know, I've always had this idea that I feel like I can't listen to music or I can't hear parts of an album properly until I see it live. And almost 100% of the time, like I'll hear things that I just didn't hear on the record, or I'll appreciate certain things on the record more because of the way that an artist played it live. So those things help build, you know, build your capacity to write well, and those things build your capacity to just be thoughtful about the work that you're doing. So I noticed early on that when you kind of like pulled that out of it, that was a shock in and of itself, because it felt like, you know, there weren't a bunch of places to get information about the work and art that we're writing about and reflecting on.
Yeah, that's a good point, Melissa. Too, even with despite my this apparent fixation or obsession with laptops and Wi-Fi, there's some days I want to just toss it off my porch. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
or toss it at my TV. You know what I'm saying? Because just like this is 24/7. Like, come on, you know. Like, I love my laptops and I love my YouTube and socials and all that. But let's come on now. This is great. Like, we're built as human beings to like interact in real life. You know, it's like IRL over URL. You know, like let's be real, right? So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially because it's even with me, when you're spending, you know, 8 hours in a row or whatever it may be in front of that laptop, you just want to walk away from that to do anything. So I totally get what you're saying, Melissa. This is the last one I have for you guys. You talked about shows not happening, and that has been the most heartbreaking thing for me as well. Concerts get all of my money. Any money that I have, it goes to someone performing live. We can't do that anymore. So things are very, very different. I've picked up tennis again. I've played tennis since I was maybe 12, 13. I've been trying to play more during the quarantine. So what's the thing that you guys have been doing during quarantine that you weren't doing as much before?
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny. I mean, only because I have an actual answer for this, which is a very like mundane answer, but I used to play soccer growing up. But it's funny because I could run fast, but I couldn't run well. And my dad plays soccer, and my brothers are all into sports. And it was this thing where it's like you could run fast if you could just like run for a long time. You
Yeah.
could be good, you could be great. So, I mean, I really tried to train myself to become a quote unquote runner. And I mean, for the first time in my life, I feel like I get it. Like I've read a lot and I've listened to a lot of people who have spoken about the many benefits of running, and it was just this like strange revelation, this thing you have the capacity to do in your body, having like a wide range of benefits in every other part of my life. So that's been my kind of activity that I've appreciated building into my schedule. It's nice to do something and watch yourself get a little bit better every couple of weeks, and to like kind of be in, have an answer when people ask you a question, what it is that you're doing in quarantine. Because I think you can have long stretches of days when it feels like nothing's happening and you're not doing anything and you're just like sitting in your house waiting for the next day to come. But to have something that you can point to and be like, oh, I have a win today because I like, you know, took myself out of the house and I went on a run, even if it was a slow one, I think can help fill in the gaps of the other parts of our lives that we typically look to for some of those solid and discernible wins. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of it.
That's a good one.
And
Here's the thing. I just to echo your sentiments, I would say, because it's a good question. I would say for me, it's physical fitness. If I'm to be perfectly honest, I don't know if this is this could be a very kind of like COVID-esque kind of way of thinking, but like when you're wrapped up this very like a sedentary lifestyle, in front of said laptop, it's super sedentary, way more so than before, where even when Mel used to work for this media company, like like we had a meeting once, remember, and Shane and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, you get out and you have like physical meetings, you're not like stuck in front of like Zoom conversations all day.
oh
So
yeah,
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so it would be, and the saying health is wealth, like, so that's something I've been thinking about a lot. And I'm a father, I have two school-age children, and my 14-year-old son, like he's been training like a 6-week program and stuff. So I just go with him. And I've been running like Mel. I've been doing a lot of running. I feel like my cardio is back, which is great. This flies in the face. No, this is huge for me, being like the old man in the group here. And that I used to run like I ran track at university, right? And I was like really fast, medals and all that. And then I shut it down. And then I became this journalist person sitting in front of screens all day, desktops and laptops, and completely shut that down. So what that meant is my cardio, health is wealth. No cardio, I had none. You know what I mean? Like or as I like to joke on my Instagram, on one of my pages, I said, yeah, the only time run is for the Queen streetcar. You know what I mean? That's the King West streetcar. That's the only time you see me run like more than 100 meters. So which is not good. It's not good. So yeah, so the physical fitness, I'm feeling like I'm in the best shape of my life. Not in my life, sorry. I mean post university when I used to run competitive.
yeah. It's so, I mean, and it's the kind of obvious alignment between, we're in the middle of a period where I think people are so hyper aware of their bodies because there's this invisible thing that can like harm your body at any time. Taking some time to really like learn your body and get to know your body and become friends with your body, whether that's through running, whether that's through yoga, whether that's through figuring out how to eat in a way that's not hurting your tummy, that's making you feel good and strong. Like I think that can be a really good distraction from wondering how many times you've washed your hands in a day, if you're trying to redirect some of that anxiety and redirect some of that energy into something else that can ultimately be productive and positive.
Yeah. And mental health too, you mentioned anxiety. Many of us are going through a lot of that. Like it's just something, whether informal, clinically, clinical diagnosis, but it's just like that's something too. The mental health piece, I think, Adriel, Melissa, is just like people are still, and I think this new normal, quote unquote, is going to be sticking around for a while. There's too many unanswered questions. It feels there's a big mystery, as to how to navigate and maneuver oneself. Whether it be through work as a journalist, when we see newsrooms are capitulating. Like I have friends, they just got laid off just during the cut. Like it's just there's a lot of weird stuff going on right now. So it's kind of like going back to the culture piece. I'm Caribbean background. My parents are from Jamaica. I was born here. So I'd always hear, give thanks. A lot of people in the Jamaica, they say give thanks. In the Caribbean in general, they say,
Yeah.
Rastafarians, they say give thanks. You know what I mean? I give thanks. Just another day to, the sun is shining. We're breathing. So I don't take any of that for granted. Keep things simple.
100%. Yeah, I think like if there's one sort of thing to leave on, it's to give thanks and to show gratitude and to name your gratitude, and also to just like check in on people who are close to you and kind of know that sometimes those check-ins and sometimes like those very immaterial things are exactly what somebody needs in the moment, if they're comfortable, because it's so strange, and it we can forget how jarring it is that we're this separate. So any opportunity to feel like you're close to people and kind of close to a community, I think will have incredible benefits.
I'm happy we can end on a positive note like that. That's absolutely beautiful. Self-awareness is at an all-time high, and
Yes.
the world is falling apart. Um, as we speak, it's literally burning to the ground. But we can take the positive. We can take the positives in that. The self-awareness is at an all-time high, and we
Adriel, hold on, I gotta stop you there. Hey, Melissa, Adriel's like, hey man, Paris is burning, the world is gone to crap, but have a great day, guys. Like
Goodbye, everybody.
But love yourself. Love yourself. Yeah, the world is falling apart around you, but love yourself.
Yeah, totally.
At the end of the
Yes.
day, it's you, yourself, and you. So, I like that self-awareness at an all-time high. Again, thank you guys so much for kind of ending this series off with a bang. I am so happy this series went the way it did. We had so much great people on here dropping so many gems, so much information. And for myself, I kind of cheated my way into getting all this information from you guys. So thank you for blessing me with all this information. But again, it's your first time listening, please follow us on Instagram. That's CJRU1280. Subscribe to our YouTube. Make sure you catch all the episodes. And until next time, take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.